It's my pleasure to introduce our final general session speaker, Dr. Holly Taylor Coolman, who's Associate Professor of Theology at Providence College. And I actually first met Holly when she was a professor at Boston College in a program called Perspectives, and I was a doctoral student there. It was obvious in sort of every encounter with Holly, and it's obvious in the encounter even leading up to the symposium here, that she's a professional who's passionate not simply about the work of an academic, of research and writing, but about the spiritual lives of her students and the art of teaching well. Holly is also a very gifted writer, and it's not unusual to encounter her writing pieces in ethics, in Aquinas, but also in America magazine. And if you know something about academic formation, it's not always usual to see someone who can cross those two worlds. In fact, that's an understatement. But Holly does it extraordinarily well. And one of the things that is dear to her is adoption. She herself has adopted. And there are a few who I've read who've thought more clearly, thoroughly, and pastorally about the ethics and theology of adoption, how it's transformative of family life itself. As she's written in America magazine, and I'll quote her, "The experience of adoption can be a powerful one, and yet persons can never be reduced to a single role they play. Birth parents and adoptees in particular are well served by both respectful attention to their experience and the recognition that this experience does not exhaust their identity. Attentive listening, careful thinking, and courageous love will be required, and a theologically informed practice of adoption will, in turn, inform our understanding of God's adoption of us. In the end, we may well find that through the lens of adoption, we are able to see the whole of the Christian life in more life-giving ways." This kind of holistic vision of family life, a vision of family life that actually forms us and shapes us to perceive God's own introduction of us into this divine family, is the reason that we've invited Holly to speak last for us. And she will be offering a piece entitled "Icons of Love, a Theological Vision of Priesthood and Family." Please welcome Holly.
My goodness. No pressure just to be brilliant and pastoral, and I don't know, we'll see. But, Tim, I just want to say thank you quickly because my life does involve a lot of things, teaching and some scholarship, a little bit of scholarship here and there, family life. My husband actually also teaches theology, and so that is just a real gift to me to pause for a minute and reflect and say, what is it that I do? And so I really appreciate that, just as an opportunity for me. Of course, I do come in here at the very last moment. I want to offer a brief word of apology for that, although I think you'll see that it's very connected to our topic today. I was not able to travel until yesterday because Tuesday evening was my oldest son's graduation from his 8th grade graduation. And it was just very important that I be there with him. And so Wednesday morning was the soonest that I was able to come. And thank you to Tim and Barb and everybody else for being so patient and working with me and allowing me to come in at the last minute. I'm happy to say that yesterday evening, I did have a little bit of a chance to learn some of the conversations that have happened already, and I will refer to those briefly, but especially one of the things that I want to do this morning is to leave some time for conversation here at the very end, and possibly even some conversation that might draw in, not just this hour, but the whole of the time that you have spent together this week. What I hope to do here specifically is to offer a larger theological perspective that might draw together some of your previous conversations and perhaps at the same time also provoke further thought. I begin with a confession. For me, as someone involved especially in family life, the first thought that I have, and the first thought that I had when I sat down to think about this presentation to you this morning, about vocation and especially the sacraments of vocation, is the tremendous number and the tremendous variety of tasks that must be performed in these kinds of work. As you all know, there are bills to be paid, there are homilies to be written, there's a budget that has to be balanced, there's a baby that has to be fed, there are tough customers and complainers that have to be dealt with. Liturgies and lawn mowing are just endless. I would not be the first to suggest, though, that before they can know what they must do and how they must do it, Christians must know who they are. And that is the direction I'd like to suggest that we take here today. Especially, I'd like to propose how it is that we might imagine the vocations of priestly office and of family life by turning to a perhaps unexpected source, the tradition of theological reflection on icons. Reflection that's happened especially in the Eastern churches, but that has enriched, I would say, the whole life of the church. To begin to understand what an icon is, I will argue, is to open a promising possibility for understanding vocation. You can see here that given the visual focus of my talk today, I wanted very much to have a visual to share with you. I am someone who learns in a very visual way. So this is me reflecting my own preferences, and I'll just do my best. I'm going to do a little bit of turning and clicking. I always say to classes, I'll just share this with you too. I actually started my full-time teaching life in a high school not that far from here, really, all things considered, especially since I now live on the East Coast. The western suburbs of Chicago are the home to the Proviso high schools, and I started my teaching career there in a high school that was a very challenging environment. We had a lot of trouble with violence. We had a full-time security force that worked in the high school and emergency phones in every classroom. And so I say all this to say it's still a little bit hard for me to turn all the way around and just operate the clicker. I still write on the chalkboard like this, you know. But I'm trusting that none of you are going to be throwing spitballs or any weapons. So I'm going to try to trust you and turn all the way around if I need to operate my clicker. Okay, so I'm at number 2 on my outline, icon theology. Icon theology, as I'm sure some of you already know, did not emerge easily. The early church, which was birthed out of Israel, knew well the commandment given to Israel, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall not have any other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or a likeness of anything in the heavens above or in the earth below or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or serve them. Although this is clearly above all a prohibition against idolatry, this foundational command has also been largely understood at many times in Jewish communities to rule out the practice of making any image of any kind, and particularly images that might be used in connection with worship. So working all of that out, again, as some of you already know, created no small amount of controversy with a final resolution to the matter occurring only in the 9th century. Over time, though, finally in the form of an authoritative conciliar decision, Christians began to see that the work of Christ, above all his decision to enter into creation, had radical implications for that fundamental command. God's work in Christ began with the astonishing fact that God himself has taken on humanity, of course, but even more fundamentally, has taken on materiality itself. St. John of Damascus the great defender of icons, put it in this way. When the invisible one becomes visible to flesh, you may then draw his likeness. When he who is bodiless and without form, immeasurable in the boundlessness of his own nature, existing in the form of God, empties himself and takes on the form of a servant in substance and in stature, and is found in a body of flesh, then you may draw his likeness and show it to anyone willing to gaze upon it. So, if God has taken this remarkable step, then humans too may follow suit. In Christ, the invisible and spiritual is joined in an intimate personal union with that which is visible and material. In this very act, God sanctifies matter anew and uses it in the form of his own humanity to unite all humanity and indeed all creation to himself, and so too with icons, which participate in their own way in this mystery. But if we want to understand better how this works, as I've said, it may be best not simply to discuss, but actually to look at some icons. So I'll invite you to gaze upon an icon. And what I want to do here, at the risk of over-familiarity, is to offer to you the icon that I bet some of you in the room already know best. But we'll start with that one. This is an icon painted. Traditionally, the Eastern churches say it was written by Andrei Rublev. And I have noted here the title of this icon, which is important. The icon is often referred to as Rublev's Trinity, but that is not the title of the icon. The title of the icon is The Hospitality of Abraham. And that's important because the very first reality with which we're confronted here is a particular concrete scene. It comes from the biblical narrative in which Abraham welcomed some mysterious visitors. They turned out actually to be angels at the Oak of Mamre. And what we're offered here is a certain sort of immediate depiction of those three visitors gathered at the table of Abraham's hospitality. And it really is a picture of that scene. I think that you can immediately see some of the details that allow you to perceive it. The table is there centrally. It's a little bit more difficult to see. Actually, I'm going to use my pointer here. It's a little bit more difficult to see, but these angels are identified both by wings and also by halos. Of course, the crucial iconic sign of the divine and of sanctity. I would say that this is the one element of icon theology that has survived well in the Western tradition, that we find images of persons depicted with a halo, intending to suggest to us that something more is going on than what we can see at the surface. And so it is with this image too, because, as we know, it's not possible simply to gaze upon the triune God. This image of the three visitors at Mamre gives us a way to gaze indirectly. And I think that indirect depiction of the Trinity, too, can be seen if you look carefully at some of the details in this image. I know not all the details are easy to see, and I thought about fixing this image in a way for you, but then I decided to just invite you to struggle with me a little bit here, to read it, to see it, to understand what it tells us. So let me just suggest, I encourage you to take a look. In fact, I'm going to invite you at this moment. If you have details that you want to point out to the group, I'll ask you to indicate that, but let me just point out a couple to begin with. These figures, their bodies and heads taken together, form a kind of a circle. The figures are enclosed in a circular shape. And that indicates something to us of the eternal character of God. In a similar way, each of these characters, each of these figures is clothed at least partly in the color blue, which is the color of divinity, the color of eternity. As I said, they have wings, and at every point, their wings overlap. Although we can discern the individual wings, they're touching at every point. None of these figures is spatially distinct from the other two. Again, inviting us into a reflection on Trinitarian theology. Further distinction might be suggested in the way that although each figure wears blue, the colors that they wear are not identical. We seem to see suggestions that, I'll start actually from right to left. Not surprisingly, and these we can still make out some centuries later. The figure on the right wears a cloak of green, generally taken especially to represent the Spirit. This figure reminds us of new life, of growth. The figure in the center has on a dark brown, possibly also red undercloak. This figure taken to represent especially the sun wears the color of the earth itself, but perhaps tinged with red, reminding us that human life is sustained by life-giving blood, and human life involves the vulnerability of blood. That character also wears a sash. It might be suggesting to us royalty, a king. Two fingers are laid on the table, taken by many to refer to the dual nature of Christ's person. Points especially to what on the table? This figure directs our attention to a chalice. The figure on the left, you see the colors are actually a little difficult to describe. What is the color of that cloak exactly? Blue is underneath, but what's the color of the... It's a kind of gold, for sure. Other colors sort of mixed in there or reflected. And of course, in a sense, this would make sense because of the three persons of the Trinity. Who is the one impossible to approach absolutely directly, to gaze on absolutely directly, but the Father? We come to the Father through the Son, through the Spirit. And so this figure on the left, taken especially to represent the Father. Other details that you see, that you have questions? Yeah. What are the little doorways up there? Again, some of the details are obscured here, but those doorways are part of a building that rises in the background. It seems to be a house. Certainly, the New Testament would encourage us to imagine especially that the first person of the Trinity, the Father, has a house and keeps a house, that there's a kind of coming home involved there, a kind of safe dwelling. I'm just an interpreter of the icon along with you, so I don't know for sure. Yes, ma'am?
At one time it showed feet at the bottom are facing outward, so the musician steps in.
Yes, I think that's incredibly helpful. So can I ask you to say that again, even a little bit more loudly?
As I finished chewing on my sandwich.
Yes, that's good. We're embodied creatures. We need sandwiches.
That the feet at the bottom are facing outward as an invitation for us to step in.
See, especially right here. And also, I mean, this might not be the first impression you have, but just to further emphasize that possible element of an invitation, notice that this table is set before you, and what's right in front of it, there's an open place. There's a seat at this table. Sometimes when I talk to my students about this, they say, it's just like all those tables on the sitcoms on TV. You know how the families always sit on the sitcoms? It's like nobody sits on this side of the table because they have to face the camera. Okay, forget that image. Okay. Yes, ma'am?
The table seems to be in the shape of a chalice,
Mhm.
and there's a little rectangle on below the table. Yeah, right there.
And what's your guess about that? What's your sense about that?
It seems that the table being in the shape of a chalice is reminding us of the chalice of the Eucharist, and perhaps that role is where we can fit in, or how we can be part of that table that God.
I certainly think the shape of the table, again, almost unconsciously, further emphasizes our appreciation of the chalice. It makes the chalice even more central. And I don't know about that rectangle. I don't know what it says. So, but yeah, that's very helpful. Yes, sir.
I heard one explanation, I'm not sure if that's what the artist intended, but the small rectangle below is the altar stone. And altars that have relics and
Oh, yeah.
that's
So I've heard this explanation also. Maybe it especially intends to say to us, as would not be surprising to us, that this table, this dinner table, also functions in some way as an altar, is also a kind of an altar. It's just different, of course, more than just a table. Yeah, that's what, yeah, me too.
I'm cheating by getting a little more detail on my device here, but the
Okay,
faces,
your grade is going to be lower for that, but go ahead.
the faces of the figures all seem to be the same. I don't see any real distinguishing characteristics of the faces.
Yes, I think that's right. Although one thing I want to point out on the faces, these figures are actually facing one another in very specific ways, aren't they? Certain of these figures are looking at others. Do you see how that's functioning? The Son clearly drawing our gaze to the Father. If you look at the Son, you immediately find yourself looking toward the Father. Again, I use these terms loosely, and the Spirit, too. Well, which figure is the Spirit looking at? Maybe both the Son and the Father, hard to say. You see the questions at play here. Yes?
And their heads are inclined as well, the Son and the Spirit.
Yes, so all three seem to be drawing toward one another in a certain way, again, into this sort of communion around the table. Okay, I bet you have more details. I could leave this up. We just to do this all. Just don't go home. We'll just do this all afternoon. Let me suggest this. I point out some of the details not to suggest that this image is best understood as a kind of simple one-to-one visual allegory. The fact is that these details, in all of their particularity, come together to form a whole, and it's the whole that functions iconically. But I think you can begin to see why it is that the Eastern churches teach that icons are theology that is told in images, rather than simply in words. One further claim that I want you to note, though, and this especially relates to the helpful observation that we had about a kind of invitation. This is a table where you're invited, this particular icon. But icons in general are understood, especially in the Eastern churches, as more than a way of communicating theology. They are understood also as a kind of opening, a window to heaven, a kind of aperture to the very reality that they represent. All right, as we move forward, I want to pause here just to note to you even further the way in which at least had a couple important spots, the way in which the actual term, icon, which is a Greek term, a term that we've borrowed from that language, appears in the New Testament. A couple crucial ways. And what I've done here is to describe this on my outline as the original icons. But I think you'll see why I take this to be important. First, we find that the author of the letter to the Colossians describes Christ himself as the icon of the Father. This is the Greek word for image. But I think knowing the later thought of the church allows us to be especially sensitive to the use of the term here and what it might teach us. Christ, this verse tells us, is the icon of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. I think you can begin to see already the material, the visible. Now, I sort of feel like, again, this verse could probably be interpreted at long length. I mean, what we're looking at in this verse, in a sense, is the very mystery of the incarnation itself. But I do think that for our purposes here, it's instructive to consider how this description of Christ fits the description of an icon that we have just seen. The representation of the Father, but not in a direct physical way. The icon of the Father in such a way that the particularities of a specific, concrete, truly human life come together as a whole to function iconically. The whole, of course, being Jesus Christ, whom the church professes as the way to the Father. Christ himself then is, in our terms, a sort of theology that is told in images rather than in words. Or you might think here of the very familiar habit that we have, although we don't always think about it, of describing Christ as being the Word of God. What a funny kind of a word that is. It's almost more like an icon. And also, again, of course, you can see Christ as the icon of the Father is not simply a communication, but an invitation and a window, the passageway to the reality that is represented. All of this, of course, originally and foundationally true of Christ. I want to pause just on that final word, though, again. I want to pause on that final point again. To think about Christ as the icon of the Father reminds us specifically that Christ does not simply communicate, represent in deep and profound and symbolic ways the truth of God, but Christ is an invitation and a passageway. You know, sometimes when I'm speaking with my students at Providence College, we talk about the genre of a gospel. Just a quick sidebar here. There actually is no genre of a gospel. Gospels don't fit into any genre. So I tell the students, if you want to figure out what the genre of a gospel is, you're just going to have to read the Gospels and try to make sense of what they are. They have certain similarities to a modern biography. They seem to tell some details about a life. But my own conviction about this is that a gospel is crucially distinguished from a biography in a number of different ways, including this. A gospel is a description of Christ that is, at the same time, an invitation and indeed a demand for a response. It is a genre that requires an answer. Well, if that weren't enough, secondly, I think you can see where I'm going to go with this next point. In the letter to the Romans, St. Paul takes this line of thinking that I'm suggesting a step further by noting the way in which we, the baptized, the faithful, also function as a kind of icon. For those that God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image. The word here in the Greek is icon, of his son, so that he, the son, might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. So Christians too might be said to fit the definition of an icon. We too live out our vocation of being little Christs in detailed particularity. And so far as we are united to Christ, we reflect him not, again, in a simple sort of one-to-one visual allegory, but in the way that we ourselves come together to form a whole that can function iconically. We too are a sort of theology that is told. And here I pause because it's a sobering point to make. But I think you can see again the final implication. We too can be even more than a way of telling theology, a way of communicating the truth of Christ, who communicates the truth of the Father. We too can be a kind of opening, can be a kind of passageway to that reality that we represent. Both a privilege and a responsibility, I would say. Does anybody have a watch I can borrow? Oh, it's up here. Okay, sorry, I'll just turn around and look. I got it. I don't wear a watch. This is crazy. I don't wear a watch or carry a phone. Somebody said to me, how do you ever get anywhere on time? It's really true. I don't wear a watch or carry a phone. I ask you guys. That's what I do. So here's my point today. You know, as I say to my students, this is what you should write down for the exam. What I'd like to do today is really just to, from this moment on, think together about the implications of this way of thinking. What I'd like to do is to take seriously this language as it's used in the New Testament, to take some of the church's later reflections on icon as unfolding the meaning of these New Testament claims. And then finally, to see what it means for us here, especially perhaps here for priesthood and family. So then, vocation in this language of icon. I think it's important to begin by speaking of Christian vocation most generally in baptism. We know already that being called into Christian vocation is being called into Christ-likeness. But to think in terms of existing as living icons, I think, gives us a new way to imagine this claim. To be baptized means that we begin a process in which God does the work of writing each of us. Always, of course, in that process, it's the original icon of Christ, the icon of God the Father, who is at the center of that process. And the process always involves each of us being, as St. Paul would put it, profoundly and deeply in Christ. We're constantly made to be more fully in his likeness. But the language of icon allows us to see clearly that process always necessarily involves the work of the Spirit, especially, as each of us becomes a likeness of Christ in a very particular way. The individual details of our own lives, although they can't be taken as a sort of one-to-one allegory of Christ's life, are woven together into a single image that resembles him, in an image that taken as a whole teaches his reality and indeed allows others to come into his presence. Here I want to note one additional element that I've not said so far, and I think it's true of this general category of baptism. And maybe I can look together with you at an icon in thinking through this. This is a common image of one of the great early martyrs of the church, Justin called the martyr. And I want to especially reflect on this icon to note the claim. These particular details, concrete, specific, lived out in a particular time and place, absolutely involve our sorrows and our sufferings as well. Very often, the icons of the martyrs, as you see here, depict the martyr holding the cross, gripping the cross in his or her hand. So this is a telling of the truth of Christ that involves the way that each of us is called, like a martyr, to give our whole life. And that such a giving, at least in this world, involves us in suffering. Even more, as you already know, the church teaches that every suffering that we face in the context of that life can be united to the suffering of the cross. My suggestion this morning is to think specifically about what it might mean for sorrows, sufferings. Let me give a few other iterations. Frustrations, disappointments, sadness, can be woven into the whole of the icon that we are. More specifically then, in relationship to priesthood and family, I'll make just a brief suggestion with each of these, and then move toward inviting your comments. If Christ is an icon of God and we become icons of Christ, we always do that in specific ways. And here, the title of the talk, I'd like to suggest that priesthood and family life function particularly as icons of God's love. Now, icons in general, of course, are these sites of powerful and profound symbolism and presence. But here is the right moment to note that at every one of these layers of iconic meaning, the motivation is one of love. Christ is the icon of the Father, not as an elaborate metaphysical, spiritual experiment. Christ becomes the icon of the Father in an action that is also the lover, reaching out to draw the beloved in. And that, I want to suggest especially, is what priesthood and family are about. First of all, priesthood. I think it is helpful to begin by saying that every baptized person shares in the priesthood of Christ in a certain sense, and every baptized person is therefore an icon in a certain sense of God in Christ as lover, reaching out to draw the beloved in. That is the theology that our lives as participants in Christ's priesthood tell. Insofar as we want to imagine the meaning of the life of those who are ordained in the church as priests and as deacons, we can imagine this truth told even more sharply, vividly, and directly. Think of the centrality of the Eucharist for priestly life. I think Father Mbelli mentioned that earlier. To celebrate the holy sacrifice of the Mass is to enact again participation in the foundational way that God the lover draws us in and makes us his own. And now, speaking of other talks, I think I am probably verging right on repeating Brant Petrie's talk. Before I knew that he was going to give that talk, I planned to include an icon of Christ the bridegroom. This, above all, for my purposes today, is the image that I would suggest to you of priesthood. I won't put a footnote, see that paper. Love and service combined in a way that is not only an invitation. Let's put an invitation in one of its most profound forms. The invitation of the bridegroom. I mean, I know that I myself had that very old-fashioned moment when my husband asked me to marry him. I didn't think of it as just another invitation. It was a deeply personal invitation. A wooing, a seeking out. That's the image of the priest that I want to offer to you. In a larger way, the priest is one who puts the faithful and the world in contact with this loving, inviting presence of Christ himself. And family life, too, I would argue, at its heart, is a kind of icon of God's love. Here, not so much emphasizing the seeking, the call for reconciliation and for union, but rather the communion that is possible when that invitation is received and responded to. Here, the central form of this life lived out is a communion of persons. Again, I would say that we should begin by thinking of this as a reality in which the whole church participates. You may know family is actually the metaphor that Jesus himself most often uses when speaking to his followers regarding how they themselves should imagine their life together. The whole church, then, is called to tell the theology of what is possible once the call of love has been heard. And the whole family of the church images this love and invites others into it. I do think that this image, although very intimate and in a certain sense enclosed, can function powerfully as a kind of invitation. In a phrase that I think most of us have heard, and some of us have perhaps been haunted by, the early Christian theologian Tertullian reports the way that pagans around the early Christian community looked at them and said in wonder, "See how they love one another." What is it that grips your heart when you hear that phrase repeated? It's the fact that we know that what Tertullian is reporting is a kind of longing on the part of those who see this kind of communion enacted. Again, just to refer briefly to one of the other papers that you heard, I think there are implications here for some of the questions about how it is that the church functions in the world. A healthy family, of course, is not a family that is closed off with the doors locked. A healthy family functions always in a form of hospitality. But it has to be centered on this kind of space. If not closed off, then indeed, in an important sense, a private space of intimacy, of safety, of deep belonging. We can't do without that center. Just to emphasize that further, I want to share with you my own favorite icon. My favorite. It's up in my kitchen. I look at it every day. This is a well-known icon in the Greek tradition. Its title is Sweet Kiss. And I'm sure that you can see here immediately, I'm sure you can, what draws me about this icon. In a world like the world always is, of competition, of cruelty even, this icon speaks to us about a space in which the individual is seen, nurtured, met as person. It tells us about a kind of tenderness and trust. So again, I offer for our consideration these individual icons of priesthood and family. But what I want to suggest, and for our conversation to follow, is especially the possibility. Can we think about the priesthood of the whole church and individual priests? Can we think about the family life of the whole church and individual families as becoming icons? And would that assist us? I think you can see I haven't yet raised any of the practical considerations that might come into play. And in many ways, I want to turn that conversation over to you. Are there ways in which this framework of thinking is helpful? It seems to me that there are some possibilities there. Those discerning the life of priesthood or the life of marriage and family could ask the question of themselves in this way. As a baptized person, I'm called to become an icon of God's love. In what way am I called to best communicate and embody that love? For formation, it allows us both to remember and to practice our rootedness in Christ, and also to attend carefully, prayerfully, to the details of our own life, to the way that the Spirit is writing us as an image of Christ. In fact, importantly, I think in the image of the icon, those two are in no way opposed, but again, are both fundamental and fundamentally tied together. So here's the framework that I offer you. Maybe it helps us only because it's something a little bit new, a little bit different. Maybe it helps us in an age in which we are particularly called to tell and to retell the good news. This allows us a new possibility of seeing all of our lives as telling theology. Maybe it allows us this possibility of seeing details and the particularities of our own vocation woven together into an image of Christ. It's my hope that, at least in some way, this possibility offers you new possibilities to think about the sense in which Christ is writing you and those whom you touch. Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to field questions about that.
Let's take that invitation of Ollie's to heart. Do you want to give them maybe a minute to think about it?
I'd like to give you a minute to think about it. I just noticed that. The word came to me. Yeah, let's take a moment. Well, let me say this. I want to invite, I don't mean to, Tim's your moderator, but I'd like to invite, this is an idea that I myself am thinking about right now. Is it helpful? Is it, what is it? Does it move us forward in many ways? But, so partly I'm interested in hearing your responses, either more conceptual or more practical. But also I think it might be very fruitful at this point in your gathering to take a moment to reflect, to ask what conclusions you will take away, or what further questions you've helpfully formed. A question helpfully formed is just as good as a conclusion.
Well, thank you for that presentation. I've been reflecting through the talk, and I've been leading a seminar this week on the deacon in the life of the church, with a particular focus on how in the life of a married permanent deacon we show not only that the sacraments of orders and matrimony aren't mutually exclusive, but mutually reinforcing. And this idea of icon, which it's occurred to me, your presentation really helped me to unpack that, both in terms of being an icon in that way as a deacon is an icon of Christ the servant, but also looking to the Eastern Church with its longer developed tradition of married clergy. So that's not to ask a question, but to answer your question about how we might have found that helpful. So that was very helpful for me in helping to continue to explore that reality that's in the church that, frankly, hasn't been reflected on very deeply.
Boy, I'll tell you, I've had the privilege of teaching some of the deacon candidates in our diocese. They come to our university for their theology training, and then to know them and to follow their stories. And my goodness, I mean, the married deacon, is the icon of a life poured out. That's what the married deacon is. That is a life poured out in service. Right, probably much more to be said there, but partly I'm distinguishing between the practical and the conceptual, or the practical and the theological. But I must say that my own sense is that when you have a life like that, incredibly demanding, seeing your life in a life-giving way is practical. An image of your own life as functioning in a way that you yourself can believe in is a practical step forward to just recenter, what is it that I'm doing? When you're so tired, when you fall into bed at night, again, it's hard to remember what you're doing. So.
Part of your question was how this talk maybe brought things together. How it brought it together for me was your comment on the priesthood of the baptized, and then the family, the church as family, and that those two realities then are iconed in some ways in the ordained priesthood, and I'm not equating the two, but and in the individual family, so that each of us in our own reality can be an icon as we walk wherever we go. And that brought together for me the whole conference, and in addition, in sort of a right proportionality of emphasizing that universal piece where we're all called, and that the individual gifts of priesthood, married life, in my case, religious life, then single life too, are ways that the whole people are drawn into that gift. So that's how it came together for me.
I know exactly what you mean, because I feel like we often struggle to give the account of both the priesthood of all believers, participation in Christ's priesthood, then this particular form of priesthood that some people embody, and so often those are seen in reductive ways, in competitive ways. Let me just tell you a quick story. Just a week or so ago, I was together with a gathering of fellow theologians, people who, like me, really like reading Thomas Aquinas. And that's what we do. We get together, we read Thomas Aquinas. But one of the rules that we have for this little group that's formed over the years is we always have with us a couple of students. We invite master's students or PhD students as it's convenient to do that. And I was trying to explain that to some people that were with us for the first time, and I was welcoming 2 students who were new. And I said to them, we're so grateful that you are here. You're a very, very important presence for us because you are the sign in this group of the way that we're all students together. It's a wonderful group. It really characterizes the way that we are together. And I was working on this paper at the same time, and I thought of that immediately. You're like icons sitting around the table to us of the studenthood that we all have shared in the past and we continue to share. Now, we weren't losing track. Often the people among us who are teachers who've been studying Aquinas longer have a greater range of knowledge. That just is the case concretely. But I meant that. I didn't mean it as a nice thing to say. It's really deeply true. And we couldn't do what we do without those people there. And I think it's something more like that.
It just occurred to me that there are other forms of icons too, besides the physical art that's drawn. What we do in liturgy is a moving icon. But music in general and words, even poetry and things like that, all can be windows to greater realities. And in liturgy, we use all of them. And so there's a chance to dance that dance and to choreograph that wonderful reality.
I mean, that's really one of the crucial things I think that the Eastern churches have to teach the Western churches. They've never lost that sense that liturgy is always a picture which is at the same time an invitation and always meant not, now I'm going to be controversial, but not simply to meet us where we are, but to invite us also to another reality.
A couple of random comments. Someone once reflected that the 20th century could be defined as the century of sound, and that perhaps the 21st might be the century of image. Even though it's probably from the 19th century, the first great American novel from Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, that brought to bear that word physiognomy, that the face would tell the story of the anguish of various people within a narrative, within a very small community of the nature of public sin. And that, of course, in the 21st century, the Facebook would tell the story of, or at least part of the story of people's lives. We just had ordinations in our diocese a week ago, and one of the popular pictures for this, well, there's two of them. One is, of course, in the Litany of Supplication as the ordinandi are laying flat, and there's the Litany of Saints, and that's, of course, quite a vivid image. And, of course, that even the image that is of the presbyterate that gathers around the bishop after the laying on of hands as the most visible sign of the presbyteral order to the local church at this particular time. Following the ordination, and of course the beautiful pictures of the cathedral, the priests of our diocese then came to the seminary for our annual priest convocation. And so we were all in one place. And the first thing that came to mind was, we're pretty much old and fat. But we never noticed it because we're never in one place. So we saw the picture of who we are, and we can't do very much about the old. But these, ultimately what I'm coming to is we are almost blinded by the amount of imagery that drowns us. The sound, we have just become, we really are now deaf to the sound. But the imagery, it just keeps coming at us. And somehow, and perhaps in our intentionality as in terms of intentional discipleship and formation, that the image, that the rediscovery of the living image, both that of in sacramentality, the creative imagination which is required for that, but also how that will communicate the nature of call and invitation, and hopefully response. So those are just thoughts.
No, I think that's very, very helpful. I think about this all the time because I'm teaching 19-year-olds who are really inundated with image. Let me just again tell you one quick anecdote. This past semester I was talking with students in a class, we were discussing briefly the disciples on the Emmaus Road. And I posed the question to them, just for a moment. These people don't recognize Christ. Is it possible could there be some way that we, in the present day, could fail to recognize Christ? And there was complete silence in the room, and for a while. And then finally one student raised her hand and said, well, no, we can't. That's the wrong answer. I never tell my kids, my students, that there are no dumb answers. I say there definitely are dumb answers. No. Anyway, she said no, because now we have the teaching of the church. So we know that Christ is divine, so we won't miss it. I said, okay. Well, what if we were? Is there any possibility? And one student, and finally, one of my most earnest and enthusiastic students raised her hand and said, well, it is true that we don't know for sure what Jesus looked like. So we could see him and not know. Here's what I'm trying to say to you. My students, who are all bright, mostly eager students, had no idea what I was asking about levels of seeing. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a weird way in which they can't see it all. They can only see the surface. And maybe that's what happens when you see 10 billion zillion images by the time you're 4. So there is a real crisis here. Now I'm just going to leave it with a negative word. But I just want to say there's a deep irony. In the age of the image of the age, my students do not understand what I'm saying when I ask them about seeing,
Okay, well now I feel like a plant because I was going to dovetail off Father John, and then what you said just kind of helps it facilitate even more. So, I work with college students, the folks who've gotten. Thank you, by the way, for your reflection. I find it very, very helpful. But so, couple things. One is that we did a retreat this past spring. It was called Living on a Prayer, and we introduced them to different prayer practices. And, Lectio Divina, Liturgy of the Hours, Eucharistic Adoration. One of the things they got really into was praying with art. And we gave them printed out icons and stuff. And they wanted more time with that. And one of the things that I kind of challenged them to do is I said, okay, this is a text, the same way that Scripture is a text. And one of the things we do for our Scripture groups is say, how do you turn off your normal way of reading, your normal way of interacting with text when you're skimming an article on the internet or you're reading something for class? How do we get you to engage the Word of God in a different way? And it's exactly what you just said. They're so used to an inundation of images, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, that we had to kind of say, all right, time out, stop, engage with this text, this image, in a different way than just double clicking like on Instagram. And because that's the normal way, and then it's off to the next one, it's off to the next one, swiping. And how do we invite them into a sustained, deeper, I guess, a kind of question for the room, a deeper level interaction, encounter with that image as a text? That said, I would just say from a practical standpoint, because these students are so immersed this is just my observation, are so immersed in a visual culture. Someone was asking me, how do you get information out? Do you use Twitter? Do you use Facebook? I say, honest to God, they don't click on links. And they don't read long reflections. But they will look at pictures. They love pictures. And so one of the things we do, if you told my college students, you have to delete every app on your phone but one, they would have a real hard time between Snapchat and Instagram, and they probably keep Snapchat just because it's a multifaceted.
I was going to vote Instagram.
Yeah, well, see, it's back and forth. But regardless, so I'll take a photo of our statue of the Virgin Mary, and put it through a filter and all that, and say, it's exams week. You're stressed out. Why not come say hi to your mother? Things like that. And the kids love it, and they come by. And there's a way to, I think, utilize modern-day visual and stuff like that as part of an evangelization and catechesis. All of which was to say, it wasn't so much a question but a comment. So thank you for what you're doing, because I think there are real practical implications and opportunities. Yes, we could call it crisis, and certainly I understand that, but I see it as an opportunity because certainly my parents didn't grow up looking at icons. Irish Catholic, they didn't look at icons. But my students want to look at stuff. And maybe it's because they don't want to read things, but we say, okay, well, but there's an opportunity there. So anyway, thanks for your thoughts.
I will say that much of what you're hinting at here, a kind of a invitation to contemplation, really, is what was going through the back of my mind as I was reading to you out loud the very end of that quote from St. John of Damascus. You know, if God himself has taken flesh, then you may draw his likeness and show it to anyone willing to gaze upon it. And I was just thinking about all the, what the skill of gazing and the invitation of, guess what you're doing? You're trying to offer your students an invitation to contemplation, whatever way you could do it. So.
Thank you very much for your talk. I think I'm also a very visual person, so the icons were very helpful for me. And two things about it. One of them, that icons, in different art often, we see something that points to Christ. So like holding the cross, there's an element of that universality of all of us desiring to be conformed to Christ. But then also the particularity, I think, is incredibly helpful with icons. So looking at the icon and trying to discern what are the particular colors or hand movements or settings or facial expressions or interaction between peoples. What is this telling us about what's being depicted? And I think that, to me, it could be interesting to use this in formation, thinking specifically about the particularities telling us what the Holy Spirit is drawing out of us. So thinking in our lives, each of us as individuals, what is the Holy Spirit specifically calling from us, or what are our particular charisms? How would you, if you had to write an icon of yourself, of course, as someone who's in progress, how would you depict mercy, or how would you depict faith, or how would you depict hospitality? How could those things come together in one icon? And perhaps doing that in catechesis or with students who are used to looking at so many very superficial pictures. It's just mass amounts of pictures, and often they look very similar, or they're just superficial in nature. If you challenged a student to sit down and write an icon of themselves at a deeper level, what that would look like. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I do think that actual use of icons can be helpful. I do use them to some extent in the classroom, and we have icons in our home. We have icons of our children's namesake saints. And I think it's interesting. In a certain way, I think that just doing that, which is to focus on this individual specific thing that's drawing us somewhere else, can already function as an implicit invitation, because, this has to do with how we speak about it too, but it functions as an invitation that looks like this. You too could be drawn into this picture. You too could be drawn into this narrative. I've noticed that this really startles my students, so now I like to do it. My students don't know this at all, and so when I learn their names, sometimes I note to them the saints whose names they share, and I say, oh, Lawrence, you don't really want to know about your saint. But when they have a funny name, when they have a new name, like Brittany or something, I say, oh, Brittany, you could be the first Saint Brittany. And they never thought of it before, that there could be a, Saint Tiffany. We just don't have enough Saint Tiffanys. We need more of those. Maybe I should say it a little bit more directly. I hesitate a little bit to jump too quickly to the tell me about your life, before I've given them an account of what their life could be drawn to. And I just find that my students at PC, many of whom are coming 13 years of Catholic school, know so few of those, either images or the narratives of the Bible, which is another way of kind of saying, here's a story that you could be drawn into. So again, we have to do both, in some way. So.
Thank you for your talk. I'm a sacred musician, and something that we talk a lot about, these days, and since the Second Vatican Council, is the term active participation. So I think in liturgical work in general, there's a large focus on what it means, particularly for the laity, to participate in the liturgy. And something I'm always a little sad to see is that we seem to forget about the two kinds, and we focus so much on active participation, we forget about the interior, we focus on exterior participation, and we neglect the interior participation. And it occurs to me, sort of an education and gazing at the icon is a development of that capacity, interior participation. So in these comments on, teaching kids to pray with the images, the liturgy as an icon itself, maybe first and foremost, it's something we're supposed to be with and enter into, more so than be busy with, or add our actions or add our though these are maybe essential things to participation. It occurs to me the icon can teach us to participate in an interior way in the liturgy. So thank you.
Yeah, I just couldn't agree with you more.
I was thinking kind of actually similar to Caitlin, particularly about usually my RCIA candidates and how they practice over the course of the year, I think understanding how the particular accounts of Christ in the Gospels actually do speak really to the fullness of revelation of many truths there. But when it comes to making the leap for how can I, as a married guy working in finance in St. Louis, actually, be a representation of Christ or be an image of Christ, they have difficulty making that leap. And so I think, I have various sacred images usually that go along with the scriptural text whenever we break open the Word on Sundays. And this is actually really helpful to me in that for those especially who are visual learners, to be able to point out that just as two different pieces of art, can look totally, totally different, have different details, but both really be an image of and evoke a sense of mercy, that's the way that they can then reflect Christ in a very real way. So thank you for that. That's a great tool for me.
It's not imagistic at all, but it's also a reason, I think, to revive the telling of the stories of the saints. Now we think that's very unhelpful, but that's the funny thing is when you start telling the stories of the saints, then you learn they actually lived in specific places, and their mothers didn't want them to go join religious life, and they, had very painful ailment, all these things that I'm just saying, you don't always have to say out loud, and you too live in a specific place, and they live. If we immerse our people in these specificities, they see that, But thank you. But that's not, that's more textual and, yeah.
Yeah, if I may make 3 quick comments. One pertain in particular to your presentation and the conversation. And we're stressing with the lovely icons you presented, life-giving images. But I think we also have to attend, in talking about formation these days, to the death-dealing images of our society. So that so many of the images, Father mentioned we're inundated with images, and so many of them are death-dealing and not life-giving. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I have stressed in the seminar is the Romans 12, 1-2. Don't be conformed to the death-dealing images, but be transformed according to these life-giving images. So the whole question of the culture and our interaction with the culture. Then 2 quick points about the icon of Rublev, which fascinated us.
Okay, I'll put that one up.
There is one interpretation of it that suggests that it really narrates one particular passage in John's Gospel. The passage where Jesus says to his disciples, and I will ask the Father, and he will send the Holy Spirit upon you. So Christ turning to the Father, asking him to send the Spirit upon the world. And then finally, as you mentioned, the title of it is The Hospitality of Abraham. And towards the end of our sessions together, I'd like to thank the hospitality of Tim, Carolyn, and Barbara, so the three figures in the icon.
Nice. I've heard that interpretation before, and then it becomes important that that maybe what you're seeing in the third figure there is a kind of docility, a kind of agreement to the request. So very beautiful. Now I realize I have probably 5 more minutes also to make you look at my favorite icon, so I'm going to be doing that now. Why would you not want to look at this icon if you could?
Something that's come up over the course of this conference a few times is how do we overcome the temptation to make our vocations very individual? Particularly, I think this is expressed with like the family and the couple, and maybe this reaches its culmination and its height with like the wedding day and the wedding business, and like how many choices a couple has to make it about them as much as possible.
Yes.
But what I'm struck by with the theology of the icon is that although there are certainly certain objects or certain features that distinguish one icon from another and tells you like who is being depicted in the icon, there is a code, a certain style that unifies icons, a certain way to write them, where they become not indistinguishable, but like the faces resemble each other so much. And I think that this taps into the reality, the thing that you were pointing out in your talk, which was that it's an invitation into a new reality to which we all belong. That we are certainly individuals, but in a sense, when we're deified, when we're brought into this new reality, we will be, in a sense, indistinguishable from each other. I don't know if there's a balance there, I think, to be struck, but I think that would be useful in catechizing and forming people for priesthood and marriage. And for whatever reason, marriage just really strikes me.
That is so interesting. So thank you for pointing that. And you're absolutely right. You can see it clearly. You infer it right away that there's a tradition of writing here. And I didn't say it. Some of you may know complex traditions of how it is that icons are produced and so on. But if I could, I'm just going to add a word of agreement and testimony to what you've just said. You know, especially in family life. I mean, I think both of these vocations are currently suffering out of isolation and atomization. But families get torn apart by culture wars about what their families look like, you know, and working mother. But here's the word that I want to add. I think it's really striking. You've just given me a way to say, how is it? In my family, I have 2 working parents. We have 3 children who came to us by adoption, you know. And we have had the very interesting experience of encountering other families, Christian, Catholic families, who look very different. Single mom, 1 child, et cetera, and feeling this deep sense of connection. You are doing exactly the same thing that we're doing. Or, you know, mom stays home and they homeschool all 11 kids. I mean, it's so different than our life. But nevertheless, we sit down at their table and we think, oh my goodness, we know exactly what we're doing the same thing. And how can that be when our weekly schedules look so different? Well, yeah, I think it's a way to think about how the details relate to the whole, which is a somewhat complicated way.
I am presiding at a wedding in 53 hours, so I just want to thank you for the wisdom of this talk, and it's raised a lot of thoughts in my mind about what I'm going to be doing during the homily at that particular time. So thank you.
I was at a convalidation of a wedding not long ago in which the priest brought out the icon of Christ the bridegroom and talked about it. And actually, the call of the homily was very much to the husband in that homily, to both partners. But if there was anybody who was singled out, it was the husband. Here you go. So, you know.
Kind of continuing on the same theme, one of my friends kind of in order to make her wedding liturgy more of an evangelistic event, she did incorporate icons into her wedding. So they had icons in the front of the chapel displayed as you came in, and they had icons on each table at the reception with a little description next to them. So I think, yeah, your talk kind of helped me appreciate her actions a little bit more. And
I'm not sure if I recommend the reception, but that's interesting.
But yeah, it was kind of a theme of their wedding, and they had the road to Emmaus was their gospel, so they had that icon very present during the liturgy. And then also just recently in the, I'm in the Masters of Divinity program here, we did affirmations as a group with our class, and one of my classmates presented us each with an icon that he thought spoke to our particular gifts.
Wow.
So just some practical uses, I guess.
They're exhausted, Tim. They're exhausted. They're speechless. Thank you so much for your reflections. I'll think about them. Continue to think about them.
I want to thank Dr. Coolman for being with us and also for helping us think through together this work that we're doing, this work of writing icons, the work of formation all of you do, the work of liturgical formation that all of you do by the liturgies that you're in charge of, you're in charge of. I'm grateful, and I'm grateful for you being present. When you're a professor or a teacher, you always don't really know that you have any effect on the lives of your students or any act of communication goes well. You're well aware of this by now. And it's really edifying for me to spend time listening to your insights, which shows evidence that somehow these 3.5 days, in some ways for each person, has been fruitful. So thank you.